August 30th, 1988, Alexandroupoli, Greece. 34-year-old Georgios Kirkos was spending time with his girlfriend, 23-year-old Fani Paraskevopoulou, at the beach. The couple was having a good time, enjoying each other's company and not causing any harm to anyone. But fate has a cruel habit of bringing harm on people who don't deserve it. All of a sudden, an unknown man opened fire at the couple with a revolver. The gunfire came from close range and Georgios lost consciousness due to his injuries. Fani was hit even worse than her boyfriend. The shooter removed the victim's clothing and dragged them to a more isolated stretch of beach. The next day, during a wine festival, a passerby was on their moped when they happened upon the two bodies. The passerby called the police, who quickly arrived on scene and pronounced Fani dead. Georgios, on the other hand, was still clinging to life. He was rushed to a hospital in Thessaloniki, and the doctors determined that they could not perform surgery to remove the bullet. It would be far too dangerous, so they decided to wait for Georgios to wake up, if he ever did. In the meantime, the police launched an investigation into the shooting. Unfortunately, there was hardly any evidence at the scene, and the investigation quickly hit a dead end. The only things the police were able to recover from the crime scene were the victim's clothes and Fani's purse, which still contained money. The only thing the police were able to determine from this was that robbery had not been the motive. Several days later, Georgios awoke from his coma. The police were very eager to question him about the attack, but his injuries had left him with amnesia. He was unable to provide any information on the attack or the shooter. With no new information or evidence, the case went cold. On September 28th of 1988, a truck driver was en route to Thessaloniki when he came across a car that was parked under a tree on the side of the road. Upon further inspection, the truck driver found the dead bodies of two people inside the vehicle. A 27-year-old Austrian woman named Gabriela Fabian and her boyfriend, 35-year-old Vangelis Koutras. Vangelis worked as a technician at the Hellenic Broadcasting Corporation, a state-owned Greek broadcasting company. The couple had been taking a road trip and they had recently entered Greece from Istanbul, Turkey. According to the police, the murder likely went as follows. The killer saw two people asleep on the side of the road and recognized an easy target. He approached the passenger side door and fired a shotgun into Vangelis' head. The shot killed him instantly and the noise woke Gabriela. In addition, the rounds that had pierced Vangelis' skull struck her hands and knees. With Gabriela injured and therefore unable to escape, the killer walked around to the driver's side door and shot her through the head. He proceeded to open the door, remove her body from the vehicle, strip her, and then he violated her corpse. Then he stuffed both bodies into the back seat of the car and wrapped them in a blanket doused in gasoline. The killer then stole the couple's belongings and attempted to burn the car by cutting its fuel line, but the safety valve shut off the gas flow before the fire ignited. After realizing he wouldn't be able to burn the car, he settled for burning his gloves, which were found nearby. The killer then fled the scene, traveling first to Isalos. A local shepherd found the couple's belongings scattered across a plot of land near a local spring. On the same day as the murder, a taxi carrying a soldier had driven past the crime scene while the killer was attempting to light the fire. The soldier reported what he had witnessed after hearing about the murder, but his driver insisted that the fire had actually been a flashlight. It did not take long to link the second set of murders to the first set. Police in the eastern Macedonia and Thrace regions were put on high alert. They erected checkpoints on numerous rural roads and highways, went on frequent patrols, increased police presence in areas that were frequented by couples, and brought in various suspects. Some officers even went undercover as couples, waiting in unmarked cars for the killer to attack them. None of their efforts uncovered the identity of the killer, but they did delay his activities. With such a heavy police presence in the area, committing more murders was out of the question, at least for a while. The media took off with the story of a serial killer, dubbing him the Dragon of Thrace. On July 24th of 1989, a burnt-out car was found on Alexandroupoli Road, just a few meters from the highway. There were two charred corpses inside the vehicle, each one with a gunshot wound to the head. The victims were identified as 52-year-old Antonis Zachariadis and his 78-year-old mother, Malamatenia Zachariadis. They had just returned home from a vacation to Sweden when their lives were cut short. The next murder happened on November 5th when a married couple left home to vote in the 1989 election. 43-year-old police officer Vasilis Satalbasidis and his 33-year-old wife Maria never showed up at the polling station. The next day, a passerby found the charred ruins of their car in a remote area near the Alexandropoli airport. The bodies of the couple were inside the vehicle, both having been shot at point-blank range by a shotgun. Following these most recent two murders, the investigators formed a promising theory on the case. Aside from the last murder, which happened during election season, each murder had occurred during the summer. Therefore, the police speculated, maybe the killer did not live in Greece. Maybe he lived abroad and only returned home during summer vacation and for election day. He could have been a student who was attending a foreign university and pursuing his other interests when he came home. This theory did not lead to any new suspects, but the police soon believed their hypothesis was proven when another murder occurred. On July 26th of 1990, a charred vehicle with Yugoslavian license plates was discovered next to a bathroom on the highway leading to Alexandropoli. There were two bodies inside the vehicle stacked on top of each other in the back seat. They were identified as Mariana Dodziovic and her boyfriend Dragan Erdels. They had been on vacation in Turkey and were driving through Greece on their way home. When they had pulled over to rest, the killer shot through the passenger window and then the driver window. There were some burnt papers in the glove compartment and 3 bullet casings from wild boar buckshot. After this murder, the killer never struck again. The reason why is unclear. Maybe he lost his taste for wreaking havoc and misery, or maybe he was afraid of getting caught. We'll most likely never know. However, there are several suspects in the case. The first was a resident of Komotini who is infamous amongst the locals. Not much is known about his life, but local residents disliked him for causing trouble in the community. People accused him of the murders and even fabricated evidence against him, but a professional investigation was conducted and turned up no evidence linking him to the crimes. In May of 1993, the shotgun that had been used in the killing spree was also used in a robbery in Thessaloniki. The person responsible for the robbery was not the original owner of the firearm, and he was also in prison at the time of the murders. The weapon had been improperly disposed of and was later claimed by the robber. In 1988, 3 men were arrested for a series of crimes, including the fatal shooting of a gas station owner in Thessaloniki. The police suspected that one of the men might be the Dragon of Thrace, and an investigation began, but the men had been in prison during most of the murders, and the guns they used did not match the murder weapon. Numerous other bits of speculation have arisen over the years, but none of them seem to have any substantial backing. Was the killer a police officer himself? Was he a newspaper boy with a route that gave him the opportunity to commit multiple murders? Was he a soldier? Some people also believed that the killer took inspiration from the infamous Zodiac Killer. Unfortunately, the Dragon of Thrace has never been identified or brought to justice for his crimes. Hopefully that will change sometime in the future, but until then, all we can do is hope that he never strikes again. December 29, 2005, the village of Ezbet Shamsaldin, Egypt. A baker woke up and started his day, using his key to open the door to his mother's house. However, something was strange. The lights were off, which he found to be very unusual. He made his way to his mother's room and found her dead, with blood everywhere. The man panicked and ran to his brother's room, where he found his brother also dead. He sprinted outside, screaming for help. 2 sisters who were sleeping in a neighboring house woke up to the baker's screams and prepared to run downstairs to help him, but they found something horrific in the downstairs of their home. The dead bodies of their father, mother, and 2 brothers were lying in the living room. On the opposite side of the village, a middle school student was walking to his father's house from his grandmother's where he had spent the night. As he drew closer to his house, the boy noticed a crowd around the homes of the two families, and he wanted to ask his father what had happened, but instead, he saw the dead bodies of his parents and siblings. The shock and horror of the scene made the young boy go into full-on panic mode, and he tragically suffered a heart attack. The boy perished at the scene. The police finally began dispatching officers to the village, which had no police station of its own, something the residents would often complain about. A massive search effort was conducted in the surrounding area, but the killer had escaped. The villagers informed the police of the identities of the victims. 50-year-old Syed Mahmoud Ada, his 45-year-old wife Sabad Ali Abdel Wahab, and their children, 10-year-old Ahmed and 8-year-old Fatima. A 26-year-old lawyer named Taha Abdul Majid Mohammed and his mother, 55-year-old Hind Ahmed Hassan. And finally, a 35-year-old teacher named Yahya Ahmed Abu Bakar, his 25-year-old wife Nima Ali Mohammed, and their children, 1-year-old Mohammed, 7-year-old Asma, and 13-year-old Mahmoud. The injuries to the victims' bodies were downright sickening. In addition to cuts and gashes, the victims' genitalia had been mutilated. Inside the final house, the police also found 5 decapitated pigeons, which Yahya had owned as pets. The bodies were confiscated by law enforcement and an autopsy was performed, which determined that the murder weapon had either been a machete or an axe. The time of the murders had been between 2 and 4 a.m., and the mutilation had all been performed post-mortem. Furthermore, the genitalia had been removed with surgical precision, suggesting that the killer was trained in the medical field. Traces of anesthesia were found on the bodies as well. There were no signs of forced entry on any of the houses, which meant the killer had most likely snuck in through openings in the roofs. There was no DNA and no fingerprints at any of the crime scenes. It has been speculated that evidence may have been compromised by the local residents who entered the crime scenes out of morbid curiosity. The police began to formulate theories on the case, and they started with potential motives. Things like revenge, land disputes, honor killings, and religious violence were all ruled out. The neighbors were all questioned, but nobody had any idea who the killer might have been. Nobody had any reason to murder the families. The police eventually brought in law enforcement officers from higher up the chain. Even more people were interrogated, including anyone with a criminal record who lived in the surrounding area. The police established security checkpoints at all entrances and exits, which prohibited anyone from coming or going without explicit permission. While the investigators looked into the murders, the locals formed their own theories. These theories ranged from unlikely to preposterous. One such hypothesis was that an ancient Egyptian treasure was buried somewhere in the village and the killer had been looking for it. After being unsuccessful, the man contacted a jinn who told him that the location would only be revealed if the man performed a sacrifice with 5 pigeon heads and a set of male genitalia. Another theory from the locals blamed the murders on the Israeli government, alleging that the Mossad had meticulously planned the killing spree for no reason. The village had no strategic value and the victims held no status in the government, but this theory was popular due to its outlandishness. The police brushed aside these theories and presented a suspect of their own. After interrogating 300 people who suffered from mental illness, they had found 3 men who allegedly experienced auditory and visual hallucinations. All 3 were arrested for further investigation. One of these men had attempted to murder and mutilate his sister at one point. They found a blood-stained robe and shoe in the man's home, which they alleged he must have been wearing on the night of the murder spree. The police held a press conference in which they announced that the killer had been 27-year-old Muhammad Ali Ahmad Abd al-Latif. Al-Latif had failed middle school and never enrolled for any further education. He had no job and he lived with his parents. According to the police, he suffered from a split personality, a persecution complex, and OCD. He also performed actions that he would not remember doing. Finally, he had an irrational hatred for every single one of his neighbors. He spent 2 years at a mental hospital and eventually stopped taking his medication. After making this announcement, the police questioned the residents of the village about Al-Latif. In February of 2004, he had snuck into a neighbor's house through the roof and tried to assault one of the women inside, but she screamed for help before he could do so. The woman's family did not report this incident to the authorities, fearing that it may hurt her reputation. However, other neighbors were not as willing to let it go, and they were prepared to lynch Al-Latif, but the vigilantes were turned away by his father and a group of sympathetic neighbors. In court, Al-Latif's father blamed the incident on his son's mental illness. Seeing as the family of the victim had not wanted to report the incident in the first place, Al-Latif was only fined 2,500 Egyptian pounds. Witnesses in the village also said that they had seen a man who resembled Al-Latif walking around the streets at midnight, but it was dark and difficult to make out the man's facial features. The police searched Al-Latif's home and found a shoe that had recently been washed. They questioned him about his whereabouts on the night of the slaughter, and the following is Al-Latif's account of that night. He left the mosque after prayers and went home to water the land, but he found that the irrigation canal was broken. Without the ability to tend to his land, he went to the village market and walked around, ate breakfast at a restaurant, and then returned home. He had been as shocked and disgusted by the murders as everyone else. After hearing this account, the police presented their evidence to Al-Latif, accusing him of the murders. Al-Latif suddenly changed his story, opting to confess rather than deny. According to his confession, Al-Latif received a phone call from an unknown man on December 29th, and the caller told him to commit the slaughter. Al-Latif did not question the order and got to work immediately, using a ladder to scale the houses and break in through openings on the roofs. The police brought him to the village to reenact the murders, and they asked what he had done with the genitalia and murder weapons. Al-Latif stated that he had buried them at the entrance to the homes of his victims, but he panicked and dug them up to throw them in a nearby canal. The investigators believed the case was closed and Al-Latif was their killer, but this sentiment was not shared by many people outside the local community. 21 members of the Egyptian parliament demanded to question the Minister of the Interior about the murder. The Defense and National Security Committee held a 4-hour-long session about the case with the Assistant Minister of the Interior. These proceedings led nowhere, and the Speaker of the Assembly ordered the case not to be discussed any further. Before long, even the locals started to doubt Al-Latif's guilt. His family had been very close with the victims. Al-Latif himself had never been nearly as insane as the police alleged, and his confession seemed nonsensical. It was also hard to believe that only one man could have been capable of perpetrating the entire crime by himself. Al-Latif's own family insisted that he was innocent as well. His father stated that they had been in the fields watering their crops on the day of the murders, then they went home at sunset. They went to the mosque for prayers the next morning, then Al-Latif went to water the crops by himself. The family went so far as to accuse the police of torture. According to Al-Latif's family, the police searched their home on December 30th, and their search was extremely violent. They broke numerous items in the home and beat Al-Latif's family members with shoes. Al-Latif himself was stripped naked, electrocuted, and whipped. After this, the police brought Al-Latif's father in for questioning alone. During this interrogation, they allegedly said, "Cooperate with us and your son will take the blame. We'll say he's insane and get a report to that effect, and then we'll acquit him." However, Al-Latif's father insisted that his son was innocent. This made the police very angry, and the torture of the family lasted for 3 more days. On the 4th day, Al-Latif's father was brought in for questioning again, and the police told him the same thing. Once again, he refused to give them what they wanted, so they upped the ante. The interrogators allegedly told Al-Latif's father that they would essay his sisters in front of him if he refused to cooperate. Only then did Al-Latif's father go along with their demands. Following this, the police released the other members of Al-Latif's family and forced them to move out of the village in order to prevent them from finding evidence of his innocence. Furthermore, Al-Latif's brother stated that a group of men arrived in the village by car claiming to be doctors just 1 week before the murders. Under the pretext of research on a virus, these men collected blood samples from some of the village residents before leaving. Al-Latif was also brought in to numerous different doctors and psychiatrists in the week leading up to the murders, and he was pronounced totally sane. He may have been struggling with depression, but the claims of hallucinations were completely unfounded. Al-Latif's brother backed up his father's account of the torture their family received from the authorities, and he even added a few details. According to him, the police had injected Al-Latif with an unknown substance and then pressured him to confess. They also gave him extensive physical training, including teaching him how to climb walls so that the public would suspect him. Most government officials agreed that Al-Latif was innocent as well, and a member of parliament confronted a representative for the Ministry of the Interior, saying that only a madman would believe such nonsense. The trial began on September 2nd of 2006 at the Minya Criminal Court. The courthouse was packed with reporters and relatives of both the defense and prosecution. Al-Latif had to be locked inside a dock to protect him from the families of the victims. A defense attorney named Talat Sadat offered to represent Al-Latif, and this was a turning point in the case. Sadat was famous in Egypt for being outspoken and very smart. When it was his turn to speak, he changed the tides for his client. The following details are from Sadat's defense. According to police and forensic reports, the murders occurred between 2 and 4 a.m., which only provided a 2-hour window. How could one singular man break into 3 houses, murder their occupants, and mutilate their corpses within 2 hours, especially given the lack of physical evidence at the crime scenes? In order for this to happen, Al-Latif would have to be extremely skilled and experienced at committing murder. It was not impossible, but it was extremely unlikely. Next, Sadat moved on to the forensic and autopsy reports. They stated that the genitalia of the victims were likely mutilated by someone with medical training due to their precise nature, but Al-Latif had never received any such training. Furthermore, his confession made no mention of the anesthetic that was found on the bodies. The forensic reports also stated that it was practically impossible for the murders to have been committed by one person. In fact, the reports estimated that it would have taken at least 5 or 6 people. Sadat then pointed to a television interview with the Director of Health Administration in Beni Mazar. The director had explicitly stated that the mutilation of the bodies had been carried out by someone with great skill, and the perpetrator was most likely a surgeon or other medical professional. Shortly after Al-Latif was arrested, this same man who made this statement toured the village and denied ever having made the statement. Next, Sadat did something that most defense attorneys would avoid. The prosecution and police had both presented Al-Latif as severely mentally ill, but Sadat argued that he was sane. He presented a report from a psychiatric hospital in El Abbasiyah, where the police had sent Al-Latif. According to the report, he was perfectly sane. The police were clearly lying. Sadat went on to call forensic technicians to the stand. One of them stated that the bloody robe the police had found in Al-Latif's home had not actually been bloody when it was found. Instead, the robe had been doused in a chemical that revealed old traces of blood, and these traces were much older than the murders. The blood samples from his robe and shoe were tested against the victims and did not match. Al-Latif was even ordered to put the shoe on in front of the court, and it did not fit, meaning that it didn't belong to him. Finally, Sadat presented one last inconsistency in the case. The forensic technician stated that the genitalia of the victims were not the only body parts missing. The kidneys and corneas had also been removed. Al-Latif's confession did not say anything about these body parts, leaving a massive gap in the police narrative. Sadat believed that a group of organ traffickers was responsible for the murders. On September 7th, the presiding judge found Al-Latif not guilty. His family rejoiced and broke into tears, but Al-Latif himself seemed indifferent. Sadat had done such a good job of defending Al-Latif that the majority of public opinion firmly shifted to his side. However, the families of the victims still believed he was the killer, and he had a security detail escort him out of the courthouse. The prosecution appealed the verdict, but this led nowhere. By the time of the appeal trial, the prosecution had been unable to gather any additional evidence. The Court of Cassation upheld the verdict, and Al-Latif was officially a free man. Nevertheless, despite public opinion generally being on their side, Al-Latif's family was under suspicion from some stubborn locals. A police presence remained in the village just to keep them safe. Later that year, the family relocated to the United Arab Emirates and have lived there ever since. Talat Sadat suffered a heart attack and passed away on November 20th of 2011 at 57 years old. The murder spree in Ezbet Shams al-Din has never been solved, and it seems likely that this will remain the case forever. With any luck, I will be proven wrong.